Good afternoon, and welcome back to the session on 24/7 carbon-free energy matching. Great to see so many of you. We didn't know how many to expect, but obviously some interest. This is going to be a super interactive session. It's quite complex. We're going to get people up and off the stage doing PowerPoints. We're going to do multiple pollings, and also we expect a lot of audience participation. So do prepare your questions. We're going to use Slido for the polling. Some questions on Slido, but also we've got a microphone that can come around. Yeah. Before we do so, we want to see who's in the audience. I always ask in these sort of public sessions, who's an energy buyer? So I ask you to raise your hand if your company, not necessarily you, but if your company is purchasing renewable energy. Okay, not bad. I know those two companies. Second question is about the suppliers, so about the energy suppliers. So who in the room is supplying renewable energy to corporate off-takers? Okay, good mix, as expected at a Eurelectric conference. And then the last one, normally the biggest group is the third parties, the others, so beverage advisory firms, software providers, lawyers, accountants, there we go, think tanks, associations. Listen, it's great to have you all here and to get a bit of a picture of who you are. Don't hesitate to raise your hand during the session. Yeah? What we're going to do first is a short introduction of ourselves, but also of renewable energy corporate sourcing at the moment, and then explain a bit about 24/7. So my name is Bruce Douglas. I'm the Director of Communications and Business at Eurelectric, and my colleague Diana Gerasim is the policy expert at Eurelectric on all things renewables, including 24/7.
Thank you, Bruce.
Okay, so my first guest today to do the presentation is Job Hazenberg. He's the Impact Director at Resource Platform, and we work very closely and collaborate closely with the Resource Platform on our 24/7 task force. So Job, please come up, and I believe you've got one slide.
Thank you, Bruce, for the invitation to speak. I have the shortest contribution of 1 minute for the whole conference, so I'll be very brief. And I have one slide to show. So indeed, I'm director of the Resource Platform, and we bring together organizations, buyers and suppliers and other stakeholders to procure long-term energy contracts for energy. And the best known are power purchase agreements, or PPAs. Well, PPAs are really the key to accelerate the energy transition, especially now in relation to the geopolitical circumstances in Europe. And right now, in 2021, we had a total of more than 18 gigawatt of installed capacity through these corporate power purchase agreements. And you can see there that this is really a booming market. 10 years ago, there were no PPAs being signed, CPPAs, and right now, for instance, in Spain, this is really one of the biggest PPA markets in Europe, and around in half of the EU member states, we now see PPAs being signed, and it can cover up to 10 to 20% of the renewables market in the near future. But still, it's a product for a very exclusive club, so you basically need to be a Fortune 500 company to sign them, so it's a very complex product. And it's not yet fit for 24/7 systems, because, for instance, it really depends on GOs that are for 1 year, and they need to be time-stamped and way more granular to be helping to really go to this 24/7 system. So that's one element we need, but many others, but there are very distinguished panelists who can tell you much more about this than I do. Just wanted to give you the high-level introduction on PPAs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Job. And Job is really, and the Resource Platform is the go-to place for all information about corporate sourcing in general. But what we want to do now is dive into corporate sourcing 2.0, as we call it. And this is why we created this task force on 24/7 carbon-free energy. Because 100% renewable matching on an annual basis does not necessarily mean 100% carbon emission reduction. And we're going to show you in detail exactly what that means with some case studies from some companies and some modeling that's been done by TU Berlin. And what that means is that even though you sign 100% renewables, you've got a target with RE100, in reality, we're not accelerating grid decarbonization as much as we could. And that's the end game. So here we say, what are the next steps towards accelerating decarbonization? And in brackets, without undermining the current system. So we don't want to compete and undermine what's going on with RE100 and the resource platform, but really explore that next step forward. The task force really was set up initially to explore the what and the why. On the website of the task force, you see a white paper. It explains exactly that. What is 24/7 and why would you do it? Yeah? We're going to move on later to do the how, and we're going to work with our colleagues at FlexiDAO and a couple of other companies to explore that, the raising awareness, but also the educational piece. Now, what we discovered by doing the white paper is the why. It crystallized pretty clearly into what I summarize as 3 main points. One is the increase on credibility and transparency of the carbon reporting. Yeah, for corporates, that's super important and will become more important. The second is the link, the direct link between production and consumption, which you do not get with annual matching. And thirdly, and possibly most important with the context that we've been discussing today, is about it incentivizes new investments in renewable and storage, be it short-term or long-duration storage. So that's critical. That's the what and the why. The companies we have in the task force, you see on the screen, it's a collection of over 60 companies active across those 3 buyers, suppliers, and others. Some of the key players. It's growing every day, so please, if you're interested, let us know, and we'll plug you in. What's coming up next in the task force? We're currently doing a survey of all the supply-side companies we know on data. And if you look into the white paper, you'll see there's a whole piece on data and the importance of granular data across different ranges of topics. And we've done a survey on production and load data. We'll be revealing some of that in the coming weeks, but fascinating to see what's already existing and the willingness of the suppliers to give it. In September, we've got a session at the European Sustainable Energy Week, and then in October, the resource event in Amsterdam, which is the killer event for renewables and renewable sourcing in Europe. You really have to be there if you're involved in that space. And it's mentioned there, this new initiative which we're working with FlexiDAO on is an academy. So it's an educational piece on 24/7 carbon-free energy. Now, we worked closely with Pexapark back in the day to create a PPA Academy, and it'll be a similar style of initiative where we provide practical details of how companies can action 24/7. So we've already explained what, why, but how do you do it? Do you persuade your CFO? Do you know, what granular certificates are? So from the basic, and I think there'll be 3 levels, so the basic, middle, and more advanced levels to that. More information on that to come. And on the right there, you see the partnerships we're already establishing. So one is with EnergyTag. They're the experts on the granular certificates that are required to make this happen. The second is RE100. Many of you will know that. It's an initiative for commitments to 100% renewable energy from the corporates. And finally, UN Energy. So UN Energy Compact has launched a carbon-free energy compact, which Euroelectric are now a member of and very active in pushing that at a global level.
Bruce, I think that was a very comprehensive overview for Euroelectric's activities. This is what makes us a game changer in the 24/7 movement. But why are we here today is not to discuss about Euroelectric. I mean, it's our conference, but we want to discuss with you about how do you actually get to 24/7 in practice, so on the ground, delivering on the ground, so getting concrete on this, and also learning the lessons from the experts, from those who actually engaged in this and can help us better understand the movement. And the third point for the agenda today is to look into the future to find the opportunities for further development of this movement. So back to you, Bruce, and let's get this started.
So we're going to start a poll, and while we're doing the poll, I'm going to introduce the first guest up onto the stage. If you could have that poll on the screen. This is a poll basically saying, where do you see the added value of 24/7? I gave you a bit of a teaser to that earlier, but whilst you're voting on those, yeah, please vote. We're going to come back to the answers and do a bit of interpretation after the first speaker. And it's my pleasure to invite to the stage the head of, global head of energy markets and policy at Google, Caroline Golin. Caroline, please.
Always good when you get a walk-on song. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Golin. My job at Google is to work with our energy team globally to either open up new markets or improve existing ones to make sure that Google can be powered on clean energy for all of our data centers and for all of our campuses, and increasingly to help all of our supply chain as well, run on a cleaner, brighter, carbon-free grid. So I am probably not the first person that you've ever heard from Google in the energy space, but I wanted to take a second to set the tone for why Google is here and for why we care so deeply about the transformation of the grid, and then really jump into our vision for it. So, I mean, at the end of the day, Google is a company that is committed to transformation. We build products with billions of users, and those billions of users depend on our products to run and to provide the transformation of this economy that we're all seeing, this digital transformation. I mean, daily we see 120 million emails come through Gmail, at least. We are growing our products day by day to meet communities all over the world. And I think we can all agree that this digital transformation is improving our lives, and it's making our economies grow in new ways. And we take a lot of pride in that. I think we were all very thankful we had this digital economy during the pandemic so we could continue to talk to our grandparents and get food, among the like, and to see our businesses continue to thrive. But what our team is committed to is recognizing more than just the products that we are servicing the economy with. Our team looks across the board and says, these data centers that are at the end of the day, the fuel that drives the digital economy, and our office buildings and our campuses, which are ultimately the labs that create the products and create the solutions so that all of our businesses can grow, can do more. We can do more. And so what we are looking at and what our goal is as Google is to ensure that our footprint on this planet, the infrastructure that we put in the ground here, is actually going to create a cleaner and brighter future, not only for Google and for our users, but for all the communities that we are invested in. And we've been on a journey, and I'm going to take you through that journey, and I'm going to help you to understand what we've learned in the process from going, let's start. Going from what was originally a carbon neutrality goal to now what is to trying to meet the goal of running all of our data centers and our campuses on 24/7 carbon-free energy. And at the end of this, when we come back, I hope that by the end you can understand what this is and what role you can play in it. So just a quick bit here. In 2007, we reached the goal of being carbon neutral, which from everyone in this room probably knows what that means. That means we bought a lot of offsets to meet our operational footprint. We were the first company in 2017 to meet the goal of running all of our operations on 100% renewable energy, and that was at a global level. So to what you said earlier, Bruce, what we did is we went out to markets that existed where we could sign wind and solar PPAs, and we bought as much as we could so that we could globally match our entire demand with enough wind and solar to say that we were running on 100% renewable. We learned a lot in that process. And as a result of that process, we took a step back and we said, there's actually a lot more we can do to drive impact. And there's a lot more that we can do to make sure the communities we are operating in are seeing a cleaner future. And that's why we set the goal to run all of our data centers and our campuses on 24/7 carbon-free energy. So I want to take you through what we learned in the transition for 100% renewable to 24/7. In our goal of meeting 100% renewable, we contracted over 7 gigawatts of wind and solar. It's a massive amount, and I don't even know how many PPAs are there. Mark on my team may know, and you can get with him later. A lot of PPAs, a lot of contracting. We actually created the first corporate green tariff, and we actually standardized the corporate PPA in this process. As we did it, we drove down the cost of solar and wind, and we're very proud of that. But one of the other things that we did is that we started buying a lot of power in areas where we were not connected to that grid. We were buying a lot of wind in the places where wind was accessible, and we were buying a lot of solar in the places where solar is accessible, but we didn't necessarily have a data center there. We didn't necessarily have an office building there, but we could get there. And the reality is that actually created some problems in some grids. We have areas in the United States where we overloaded the grid with too much wind, and then we had distribution issues. We had areas where we were running significantly on coal, even though we were claiming that we were 100% renewable. And so this started coming to light, and we were saying, okay, well, why aren't we decarbonizing the grid even though we're buying up all this wind and solar? And the reality is, as many of you know, because when the wind doesn't blow and when the sun doesn't shine, we're still running on something because we have to run all of our operations. So what we ended up doing is we ended up continuing to run on coal or on gas, largely coal. And so when you look at this is a heat map, right? Below. This is what we look like with 100% renewable energy for any one of our data centers, right? All the green is when we're running on carbon-free energy, is wind and solar, and all the gray is when we're not. So you can see this is peaky, right? And so we're still relying on these fossil fuel generation units, and we didn't want to. We wanted to move beyond that. So we set the goal to say, no more. By 2030, we are going to run all of our office buildings, all of our data centers, our operations are going to be 24/7 carbon-free energy. So that means that all that gray has to turn to green. But that also means that we have to figure out how to get that gray to green, and it will largely not look like more wind and solar. When you transition from 100% renewable to 24/7 carbon-free energy, it means you have to start looking at the system as a whole. So right now, we look at it in a way that says, okay, I'm going to buy globally. I'm going to buy as much wind and solar as I can to match my global footprint. But what happens when you actually say, I'm going to take a look at the grid that I operate on, and I'm going to identify the hours and the times and the technologies that are needed to get that grid to zero? And that's what we're doing. So right here on the right, is it coming up for everyone? It's not really coming up. Okay, it's coming up, right? So this is another heat map, right? And so what we're doing is we're moving from all of that gray and we're moving it to green. And this is, a lot of explaining, and you understand. But I need for everyone to understand that there is a difference, a major difference from a technology perspective, but there's a major difference from a system perspective and what the role of the buyer community is going to be moving forward to do this. Here are our principles for 24/7, and is what we've outlined, and we have a paper which is on our website, which I encourage anyone to go look at because it's very detailed and much more informative than I'm going to be able to get to in the next few minutes. At a high level, what 24/7 means is, it means 5 main things. Time-based matching, which means we're moving from this global annual volume-based goal to an hourly matching of our load. It also means local procurement. No more buying wind in Iowa to service a data center in Germany, okay? It means we have to focus on the grids that we operate on. It means we're technology inclusive. We're moving beyond wind and solar. It means that we're looking at all carbon-free energy, and that includes nuclear and carbon capture sequestration. It also includes a lot of new technologies that aren't even there yet, which means we're going to have to invest in them. It also means additionality. It means you have to bring on new load to the grid. And ultimately, we say the grid is the goal. The goal is to drive impact on the grid. And that means we're going to have to work together to do it. We set out this goal with the firm belief that this was the right framework to decarbonize the grid, but we've been encouraged to see that other universities and other major players in the ecosystem have shared this. There was a recent Princeton University analysis, and I believe we'll hear from Tom later about some analysis coming out of Berlin about why the framework of 24/7 is actually a quicker, more cost-effective way to fully decarbonize the grid than a 100% renewable approach, and certainly from an offset approach. So for Google, I'm going to say that these are our 3 main ways that we are going about 24/7. We look at it as sort of the 3 legs of the stool. Purchasing, we're transforming the way we purchase power, the way we do contracts, the way we partner with our suppliers. Technology, we're investing in next generation technology, the one that we need to scale from the kilowatt to the megawatt stage that we're absolutely going to need if we're actually going to decarbonize the grid. And the last one, which is the team that I lead, is policy. This is a system change. We will not decarbonize the grid unless we fundamentally change the system, and that means changing the policies, the regulations, and the markets which have guided those systems for 100 years. I'm going, back. Sorry. So this is an example of how we're changing purchasing. So we just did a new deal with Engie, and they will be up here to talk about this with us. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But what we did is we partnered with our supplier, and through a lot of work iteratively, we said, here's our goal. We want to take our carbon-free score from 62% to 80%. Work with us to stack the technologies. No more single-source PPAs. Let's look at this as a group, and let's look at this in relationship to the grid. And the one thing here that I have failed to put in the beginning, but we may talk about later, is that we count the grid in the way we look at this, okay? So when where we operate, the grid as it exists in an hourly, the grid as it exists before we are there counts towards our score, right? So we are taking the grid as its whole, and we are looking at it and including it in the way we move forward. So we worked with our partners to say, how do we stack new technologies? Engie is largely wind and solar, but we're looking towards storage, to how we actually get our score from 62 to 80%. The other thing we're doing is we're investing in next generation technology. We are investing in geothermal right now, a partnership with Fervo Energy in Nevada, which is going to be sort of the first corporate offtake of geothermal, and it's the way we are going to be able to ensure that we have firm, always on, carbon-free energy so that we can turn that gray into green. And the last big way that we are looking at this, which I think underscores a big shift. So not only are we changing the way we procure and we're changing the way we invest, we're also changing what our role is in this ecosystem. I've said it before, but buyers have largely been able to be somewhat agnostic and absent from the policy and regulatory space because we could just go to the markets where we could sign PPAs. So that's where we went. Not really our fault. It's just that, we were going to do what was the least resistance. But if we're actually focusing on the grid and where we operate, that is going to force us as a community to say we're going to have to get invested in the policies and the markets and the regulations that shape these grids. Because if we don't, we're never going to meet our goals. We can't just go to a more favorable market. We have to fix the one that we're in. And so for us, when we think about policy, we think about it as three main pieces as well. And I will talk about this a little bit in my closing remarks. But we need to advance technology and expand markets and empower consumers. And what that looks like here is that every person in this room needs to be investing in looking towards the next technology. We need to have policies and financial structures and contract structures that can get the next technologies on the grid that we need. We need to open up and refine markets so every customer has access to clean energy, and that we have the data on the grid to make sure that we can actually understand our carbon score. And then lastly, we need to make sure, above all things, that we are working in a system that is prioritizing decarbonization first. That's the goal of all policymakers and all buyers in the community together, and that we focus together. So I will talk a little bit more at the end about how everyone can be part of this, but all my other colleagues are going to pick pieces of this and do a much better job than me.
Thank you. Caroline, just stay here.
No, I go over here.
Oh, you can stay here.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I'm American. What?
No worries. Thank you very much, Caroline. It was very interesting, and actually we can realize that for Google, the value added is in decarbonizing the grid and accelerating this decarbonization. So before, I have some questions for you, but before this, I would like to see the results of the poll, so see what the audience thinks. Well, it seems that the audience kind of agrees with you, so accelerated decarbonization, but also transparency, which was also something that you talked about, so showing in a way what is the impact of the buyer on the grid. Actually, we have now 50-50. But I'm interested in something else when it comes to Google's engagement in this 24/7 movement, because I know that you are very engaged in the UN Carbon-Free Energy Compact. So my question would be, where do you see the value added when it comes to creating an ecosystem of 24/7 players?
Yeah. Oh, it's a great question. For some humility, honestly, when we launched our goal to be 24/7 carbon-free, we assumed people would get it, actually. And that didn't happen, just to be fair. It didn't happen. We have all grown up in an industry that was dominated by a few technologies, and those technologies drove a few markets and a few contract structures and a financial system, and drove the research and the innovation of all of the others that you talk about. But what we're trying to do is fundamentally change the systems that we operate on. And our grid was not built for a decarbonized future. Our energy markets were not built for a decarbonized future. Our buying structures, PPA structures, were not built for that. And neither was the research community or the data or anything was not built for that. If anything, renewables was sort of siloed for a long time. And it has inched its way and forced its way into the conversation. But the conversation has not been, we are decarbonizing the grid. So if we decide we are decarbonizing the grid, the entire system by which we operate, the entire ecosystem by which we all enjoy these wonderful professions is going to have to change. And if that has to change, that means we all have to change, and we are going to need a place to figure out that change together.
That's a great message. Thank you very much, Caroline. I would now launch the second poll, because now we'd like to do some maths with you. We'll have Tom Brown joining us on the stage to present the modeling of the 24/7 carbon-free energy impact on the grid. So he will do some maths, and you will also do some maths on your side. The question for you is, for a typical consumer that achieves 100% annually matched renewable energy using PPAs, what will be their equivalent emissions reduction achieved for the energy consumed? And while you reflect on this and answer the polls, I give the floor to Tom.
Thank you very much. Perfect. So what I'd like to present today is some modeling work we did looking at the effects of 24/7 procurement on the European system. And this was done with my colleague Igor Repin at the Technical University of Berlin. This is a collaboration with Google, and we wanted to look at 4 EU countries and the effect of a large part of the corporates, or a fraction of the corporates, doing 24/7 procurement up to the year 2030. And what we want to answer is, how do we actually get there? How do we actually achieve this hourly carbon-free matching? What's the cost premium? What's the role of advanced technologies like long-duration storage or dispatchable clean technologies like advanced geothermal or also advanced nuclear? And if we have a substantial fraction of companies taking this 24/7 approach, how does this back react on the rest of the system, particularly with regards to emissions, fossil fuel capacity, and cost? So this project started just a couple of months ago, and what I'll show you today is some preliminary results from the study. So here's a graphic that kind of illustrates the problem with 100% annual matching with renewables. So here we have a winter 2-week period in Ireland, and you can see the demand in the background there in gray, and then the wind PPA there in blue. And you see, for 1 week, we have very good matching of the renewables with the demand. But for that second week, we have a whole week with very, very little generation from the wind. That's a problem, because it means the rest of the system has to keep capacity to cover that demand. That could be high emission generation from coal or gas, and it could also be high price, putting also the buyer at price risk. So we want to look what happens when we move to a different system where we really have hourly matching through a 24/7 carbon-free approach. So I'll show you some modeling results. This is done for Ireland in the year 2030, so we use 2030 costs. We also take into account that the Irish government has an 80% renewable electricity target by 2030. And when we actually add up how much of that hourly demand is really met by carbon-free energy, then if we take this 100% renewables annual matching approach, we only end up matching 70% of our hourly demand with this carbon-free energy. And that's because we have these times of deficit when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. So as Caroline mentioned, we also take into account the grid. So we have to cover the other 30% with electricity from the grid. Some of that time, that grid electricity will be clean. And if we add that, we can then reach up to 80%, including both the directly procured energy and what we take from the grid. So we're only actually reaching 80% carbon-free electricity when we look at the hourly basis. So what we can do is then trying to force into the model higher levels of hourly matching. So I'll show you a few results here. We go from 80% right the way up to 100% carbon-free energy on an hourly basis, and you can see there that we increase both the amount of electricity we directly procure, and we're also then, to some extent, relying on the grid imports as well. So that's our goal, to really get to that 100% hourly carbon-free energy. So what effect does this have on our emissions, and what does it cost? Well, if we look at the emissions first, the background grid is relatively clean. We have 80% renewable electricity in Ireland for 2030. So we have an average emissions factor in the grid of 120. So by going to 100% renewable energy matching, we do actually decrease our emissions of our procured electricity, but not by a huge amount. We're talking 30 to 40% reduction in our emissions rate. But then to really get to zero, we have to introduce the CFE target, and basically only above 85% are we getting a significantly better result than the 100% RES, and then with 100% we push it all the way down to zero. So as we tighten the CFE target from 80 down to 100, the emissions of our procured electricity go all the way down to zero. So what does that actually cost? Well, for this cost structure, what we're doing is we're adding up all of the costs of the procurement, directly procured wind and solar, but also the electricity that we have to buy for the grid to cover up the deficit. And this is the result we get for our 100% RES purchasing. We have a mixture of wind and solar, and we're getting an average cost then of 60 euros per megawatt hour. So we've just done the breakdown here of the average cost of supplying our demand. So this initial results, when we go to the carbon-free energy target, we're using existing technologies. And of course, we can use wind and solar, and we also have batteries there as our existing technology. But that, of course, is going to get expensive because we need to cover those longer periods with low wind and solar. And lithium-ion batteries, for example, are expensive on a euro per kilowatt-hour basis to build, and so we get a significant cost premium. So as we go up to 98% hourly matching, we're getting a 60% cost premium there. And if we go to that final extreme at the end of 100%, then it's significantly more expensive. And this shows you with existing technologies, this is a difficult target to reach, and it also shows you how this hourly approach incentivizes other technologies into the system. So if, for example, we add to the mix long-duration energy storage, which we'll do here in this example, long-duration energy storage I'm defining as a storage technology with a storage investment cost below 10 euros per kilowatt hour. So that's substantially below what you get for a lithium-ion battery in 2030, which is maybe 150 euros per kilowatt hour roughly. This then limits this PPA, this procurement cost increase. So you can see particularly towards the 90 to 95 to 100%, the long-duration energy storage is really playing a role there to keep the total costs of the procurement down. In this example, we've taken hydrogen storage in underground caverns with an investment cost of 2 euros per kilowatt hour. That's one of the options for long-duration energy storage. It could be a different technology, it could be a form iron air battery, for example. It really brings that cost premium down for this 100% CFE, down to more in the region of 50 to 60%. We could also consider having some advanced dispatchable clean energy technologies. We could take, for example, advanced geothermal or advanced nuclear, and they would further limit the cost because they would be dispatchable at any time during the year. And that basically removes a lot of this cost premium that we need for this hourly CFE. So obviously these results are quite sensitive to the cost inputs that we put into the model. Here we're using an example with an LCOE of 88 euros per megawatt hour for a carbon-free technology. So this has to be, one has to look at the cost assumptions here very carefully, but you can see that once we take this hourly approach, we have a clear incentive to develop these new technologies like long-duration storage and advanced dispatchable clean generators. So what's going on in the rest of the system? Well, for this example, we assume roughly around 25% of the corporate and industrial buyers are following this 24/7 approach, and we look at the impact of that on the rest of the Irish system. So here we're looking at the total system emissions in the rest of the Irish system, and we can compare that to our 100% annual matching approach and see that if we crank up the CFE target, then we're getting a real reduction in the total system emissions of the Irish system. And that's because this 24/7 matching approach is stepping in those hours where there isn't much wind and solar and displacing fossil generation from the system. So it's reducing both the amount of fossil backup capacity and the emissions from that capacity in the system, and we're getting here a real reduction of around 500,000 tons of CO2 per year. So that's the system benefit of the 24/7 approach for the rest of the system, and of course it leads to lower backup capacity and also lower system costs because we've moved the efforts to back up that period with low wind and solar to the corporate buyer from the system. So we're also running this analysis for other countries in Europe. We're doing Ireland, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Germany. And here you can see roughly the same trends and the results that as we crank up the CFE target, then costs also rise. Here you see long-duration energy storage in Denmark, for example, playing also a role as we get up to 100%. The Danish system, of course, by 2030 will be a lot cleaner than the Irish system will, so we can to some extent here rely on the background grid, and you see that especially for the lower CFE targets. So the results do depend somewhat on the local resources as well. So to wrap up, if we follow this 24/7 CFE procurement or some amount of the corporate and industrial off-takers do, this will reduce not just their emissions, but also the emissions in the rest of the system. We see for 80 to 90% CFE targets, we can get there with existing technologies, and there's a relatively small cost premium versus annual renewable energy matching. Going above 90% in the direction of 100% can be more costly. It depends a little bit on what technologies are available. If we have long-duration energy storage or advanced dispatchables, then that cost premium is lower. But that's one of the main points of the 24/7 approach is to really trigger interest and investment in these new technologies so that they're there when the whole system needs them. So if Google has incentivized them by 2025 or 2030, then they're there and ready when the rest of the system needs them in 2035 or 2040. And we can also see from these initial results that this 24/7 approach clearly does benefit the rest of the system, both reducing the emissions in the system and the flexibility needs as well. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Tom. I've got a question for you, but also I see there's a question in the audience, if we can get the microphone to Jesse in the middle there.
Yeah.
We'll take both together. So whilst you're waiting for your microphone, if you don't mind, I'll start. But keep your answers short, please, Tom, in the interest of time.
Yep,
we
sure.
want to get to the panel discussion. So the question I have for you is, you're talking about grid. I mean, from a policymaker perspective, what's the most effective thing they can do to get the grid ready for 24/7?
I think they need
take
to...
the second question as well.
Yeah, sure.
And then you can combine it.
Okay, this is cute. Tom, it's a question for clarification. Have you sized the system in Ireland in 2030 to include those mobility and heat loads on the electricity system that we've been discussing in the rest of the conference? Is this today's electricity system in 2030 with more renewables, or is it tomorrow's electrified energy system that we're looking at? It just wasn't clear to me.
Okay, yep. For the policy question, I think you need regulations and standards there to recognize these voluntary efforts. And we'll discuss it later in the panel, but I think they're really granular, time-stamped, location-based certificates so people can really demonstrate that they're achieving this 24/7 approach would be one of the main things that policymakers could do. But I'd have a few more suggestions which we can discuss afterwards. To answer Jesse's question, we are assuming that the 2030 targets for the renewable electricity in the Irish system there are met. This was just a power system investigation, but we will also add the rest of the system in there as well when we go beyond just these preliminary results. So we'll do that in the course of the project as well.
Yeah, great. We'll come back to you, someone in the panel, if you don't mind. Could you show the poll results, please? Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thanks.
So there we go. Yeah, so you were correct. And if you were paying attention, you would have seen Tom actually showed at least part of the answer on his slides. We based this on the McKinsey study. If you've not read it, read it. It's fascinating that they dived in as well into the impact of carbon-free energy and what 100% annually matched means versus that. And there you see, it is right. It's about 40 to 70%. 40% reduction for solar and about 70% for wind. Of course, it depends heavily on which country you're in. And Tom showed a couple of examples. So we're going to kick off the next poll and then introduce the next speaker. So the next poll is about the barriers. So what, in your opinion, is holding back the adoption of 24/7 CFE? Whilst you're answering that question, we invite the next speaker, who is Sebastian de Menten, the Innovation Project Lead at ENGIE. Sebastian, please.
Yes. So good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here and to share with you some elements on delivering 24/7 carbon-free energy. So before going for 24/7 carbon-free energy, let's look at how we deliver standard green electricity. So I did three kind of maturity level for green electricity procurement for corporate buyers. The first one is a corporate buyer that will just buy its electricity needs. That you see here, it's a weekly pattern of a couple of days of a profiled client. And he will then complement this with guarantees of origin, either European or country-specific or technology-specific. That's really level one of a green electricity procurement. Then the consumer can move to a corporate PPA. And there they usually will start with simple corporate PPA, what we could call green baseload. What is a green baseload? It's an annual volume of electricity with an annual volume of guarantees of origin, but delivered as a baseload. So you get such kind of procurement. And the consumer will need a supply contract to manage the balance of energy. So buying when he has not enough and selling back the excess. And the third one is when the consumer moves to an as-produced corporate PPA. What does it mean? Is that he's really buying the output of an asset. Not a virtual baseload, but really the output of the asset and getting the guarantees of origin of this asset. It will always need a supply contract to balance the electricity needs. And here, in the three cases, the consumer is always thinking annually. So it will match his load with an annual purchase of green electricity. Yet, in the third stage, it's already quite close to a 24/7 approach. And in the 24/7 approach, what the consumer will try to reach is to reach a maximal match between the load and its portfolio of carbon-free energy. So what does it look like today when a consumer comes to ENGIE for a 24/7 carbon-free energy offer? Well, what he will get as a first approach is still corporate PPA on as-produced electricity, meaning you will get the electricity of specific assets. Not only one, but usually a portfolio of assets. But the mindset is different. It's not only optimizing, it's not only matching the annual load of the consumer, it's really optimizing the match between the load and his portfolio of renewable assets. And here below you see an example of a consumer buying his annual needs of electricity with green electricity. Yet the three first slides are stage 3 kind of procurement. So the consumer is just buying its annual needs without looking at the match. And what you see, the percentage, or percentage consistent with the poll, is the percentage of match between the load of the client and its green procurement. You see for solar, for such kind of profile customer, you reach 45% approximately of match. If you go for wind onshore or offshore, you can go up to 50% more or less. But with a 24/7 carbon-free energy mindset, what you will look is to optimize your sourcing portfolio, diversify it, and typically end up with a combination of solar and wind asset. Here, for this kind of profile, the optimal match is 60% wind, 40% solar, and you will reach 65% approximately of match. Obviously, with all the caveat of what Caroline was mentioning with additionality, etc. But when you try to deliver carbon-free electricity to client, that's the kind of approach you bring to the table for the consumer. That's really the first step in 24/7 carbon-free energy. And you see also for a base load that the ratio are a bit different, but it's the same spirit. Now, what's next? What's next is not yet already common, but we are working on this, and it's typically what all energy actors can work on to allow consumer to reach this 100% 24/7 carbon-free energy. And these are three key points. The first one is obviously continuing adding mature carbon-free energy sources, solar and wind. Secondly is introducing new carbon-free energy technologies, like geothermal energy, tidal energy, or the use of the existing thermal assets, but with renewable gases. And finally, extending the flexibility means, demand-side management, batteries, hydropump storage, such kind of means of flexibility. And finally, introducing granular energy attribute certificates or hourly guarantees of origin to ease the tracing and reporting of this carbon-free energy, but also to introduce a secondary market for these guarantees of origin and give the right price incentive for instance, flexibility means for batteries. Finally, what we see is that 24/7 carbon-free energy is really the unifying approach to involve consumer in this net zero grid transition. Because if you don't go for 24/7, consumer will not be interested by the second and the third point. They will be just fine by buying annually their electricity needs. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Any question?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sebastian. I think you did a great job already with demystifying the buyer's pathway for the 24/7 CFE. Matching, I have a question to you because maybe suppliers in the room are actually wondering what are the simple, the key tools that a supplier would need in order to offer a 24/7 carbon-free energy supply?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say the first tool is to have a good PPA practice, PPA desk, that can source carbon-free energy upstream from generators and then be able to structure the sale to corporate buyers. That's the first one, with a proper risk management of all the risk involved in this activity. The second one is having analytical tools to do the kind of simulation I show you. Because without these, first, you can't do much in terms of optimization. And secondly, for the consumer, it's essential for the one who wants to enter in 24/7 carbon-free energy to visualize what it means. So just showing for newcomers, not the front runners in the room, but for newcomers, it's essential to show what it means concretely. So showing their profile, showing their portfolio that we are proposing to match. So the visual understanding is key to onboard new consumers in this. And I would say the last one is really a kind of internal consultant that can focus on 24/7 carbon-free energy, that can support your sales team, that can explain to your customers how this 24/7 carbon-free energy works.
So we see that it's indeed an unifying approach. Thank you, Sebastian. Do you want to have a hint at the replies by the public? So what they consider as being a barrier? What do you think they would say? Barrier to 24/7 development?
I think it's mainly about knowing the concept and being confident and being understanding the concept.
Okay.
So to appropriate the concept of 24/7, because once they've done that, they're usually quite bullish, I would say, on the approach.
So demystifying and fighting complexity. Let's see what the audience said. Insufficient understanding of the market, but also high costs. So that's something maybe you would like to discuss later. Already, Tom has touched upon the cost increase with 24/7 matching. Thank you very much, Sebastian. Now I'd like to invite on the stage Constant Alarcon. He is Program Manager for Clean Energy at C4 Cities, and the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Keep it to 5 minutes, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Body on my, losing all my innocence, yeah, body on my.
Thank you very much. So I'm bringing a little bit of a different perspective here. I manage the Clean Energy Program at C40, a network of the world's megacities committed to tackle climate change through taking actions on waste, transport, and buildings. And energy sector at large, and the electricity sector in particular, is usually less of a focus when thinking about the role of cities when tackling climate change. But actually the emergence of decentralized technologies, the urgency of decarbonization, and new digital solutions, including for DSM, means that they have a really central role to play in the energy transition. So cities around the world have made a range of commitments on electricity decarbonization. On average, it represents about 60% of their emissions. At C40, we've launched our own renewable energy declaration, through which cities commit to fully decarbonize grids, but only a couple of cities so far outside of the C40 network have committed to 24/7 CFE, a couple of cities in the US, including Des Moines in Iowa. I think what's interesting is that, similarly to the corporate world, there is an emerging realization that annual matching is not enough to achieve full decarbonization of the grid for cities, and that you can't leave it for grid operators, to utilities, to kind of solve the balancing issues and the last kind of 10% or 20% of decarbonization. But I think what's interesting is that cities mostly are quite different from corporates. Obviously, they have their own operations that they need to decarbonize, and for that, they need to make sure that they can move towards 24/7 carbon-free energy. But the rest of their demand, their citywide demand, goes beyond their own control, goes beyond their own, even their own kind of zone of influence. They are an aggregation of a multitude of demand nodes over which they have very limited control. That also represents an opportunity in progressing towards 24/7 CFE, because it gives a chance to think about a neighborhood scale approach to energy decarbonization, bringing together demand-side flexibility at the local level between a large industrial consumer, for example, and a range of smaller consumer on the other side, but also a possibility to think about how to maximize the amount of locally generated renewable electricity through things like planning or solar mandates on buildings. With very generous support from Google, we've actually been working on identifying what does the 24/7 CFE approach means for cities, given those differences with the corporate world. And we've published a white paper today that is on our website, and basically it shows that it's really a paradigm shift in how cities need to think about electricity system. And we've developed kind of a pathway for implementation that looks across 5 pillars: data, technology, infrastructure, policy and governance, and finance, and looking at the 4 levers that cities can use to progress quickly towards 24/7 CFE. The first one being energy efficiency. That's clear for everyone. This is the first thing we need to do. It's pretty straightforward. The second one is demand-side management. How can cities bring more flexibility onto the grid? How can they make sure that we can flex demand in a way that aligns with carbon signals? And of course, on the supply side, there's the potential to produce or to generate carbon-free electricity at the local level, but also looking at supply from outside of the city boundaries, given that cities are unlikely to generate all of their electricity from within their boundaries. So just quickly about the role of cities, they have a wide range of tools they can rely on to progress towards 24/7 CFE. And although, again, only a few of them have made this commitment as such, they're all taking actions across those 4 levers that I've described to progress towards 24/7 CFE. I won't talk about energy efficiency in buildings, but to give you an example, London has been working with local large energy consumers to identify the amount of energy that could be flexed across the city, identifying 1 gigawatt of demand-side flexibility across the city by 2050. Another example of what cities can do, a bit of a different example in Los Angeles, where the cities do own and operate their own electricity system. They have a target for 100% decarbonized electricity by 2035. By definition, that will be 24/7 CFE, and they are relying on future technologies such as green hydrogen and other clean firm technology, as we've talked about to get there. And finally, cities can work on the supply side. They can sign PPAs for their own operations. I took Sydney as an example. They have signed a PPA with a mix of solar and wind to match approximately 70 to 80% of their demand. Another example is Melbourne, where the city is bringing together large energy consumer on an aggregated PPA and combining that with a new program on facilitating the introduction of a network of battery storage system across the city to make sure that they can get closer to this 100% 24/7 CFE. Finally, just a quick ask to the room. Cities have a very big problem when trying to progress towards 24/7 CFE, the lack of data about the carbon content of electricity that comes onto the local grid. But they also need very close collaboration with utilities, network operators, as well as large demand-side actors to progress towards 24/7 CFE, because they won't be able to do it on their own for very obvious reason. 4 minutes 35, more or less.
Thanks a lot, Constant. And for me, it's fascinating to see and super exciting to see cities and the public sector getting excited about it and moving in that direction. Also, don't worry, we all have a problem with the data topic. Yeah, we all need more data, that's for sure. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip the question in the poll, and skip straight to the next presenter, and we'll get you on the panel in a moment. Thank you so much, Constant. So the final speaker today is Fiona Tiller. She's the product owner at Power Ledger, and she's going to give a bit of detail about data and digital solutions for carbon-free energy. Fiona, over to you.
Thanks, Bruce. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Fiona Tiller. I'm the product owner at Power Ledger. Power Ledger is a blockchain technology company. We specialise in digital solutions for our customers in the peer-to-peer energy trading space, in the local energy markets and flexibility space, and also in the environmental attributes commodity space. Fantastic. This is just a bit about us. I think I've kind of given you a good overview. So what I might do now, rather than focus on what we're committed to ourselves for our customers, is move into the solutions that we have and provide real use cases around customers wanting to move towards 24/7. So the first use case I wanted to talk about today is our partnership with Equator, which is a renewable energy provider for customers in the France region. What we have done with Equator is they wanted to provide their customers with a high level of transparency about where their renewable energy was coming from. So Equator is using our Vision tool. We integrate with the smart meters via API integration to connect to their renewable generation assets to create a digital time-stamped and granular record, both of the energy production but also of the grid-based consumption. Using that information, we use our trading algorithms to apply the energy matching against the customer's profiles, and then serve that up visually to customers so that they can see across the day at every hourly interval what energy they're consuming. And then on the back of that, we've enabled another tool which allows them to choose their mix. What that means is they can actually look at Equator's generation assets or select a preferred project or a preferred energy source, and then those rules are applied in the trading algorithm so the customer can actually see that change in their consumption profile and see their grey hours turn greener. This has been fantastic for Equator in terms of customer engagement. They've seen customers having a high level of, very receptive to what they do, willing to paying a premium for this kind of offering, but also then the retention around that. For Equator, it's meant they've felt very committed to rolling this out, not just to the project itself, but to all of the premium customers that in the Equator model. And what this means is we've got a broader market participation, not just for commercial or industrial players, but for retail customers today in the 24/7 space. I'll be quick. The second use case I wanted to talk about is something we're doing with a number of our larger corporate customers and commercial customers, which is around the energy management portfolio. So this is for them being able to visualise across the day on a 24/7 basis what their energy consumption looks like. This tool's been incredibly effective in them being able to have these internal discussions about the decisions they need to make for their external procurement, but also what else they can do beyond that. So again, we track the energy consumed and produced in near real time. It can be 5 to 15 to 30-minute intervals. We create a digital timestamp record of that, and we match that off against their consumption profiles. The energy sources can come from their PPA agreements, their green energy tariffs, or their grid consumption, or even actually behind the meter, the on-site generation. we provide the matching and visualisation access at hourly levels, and then they arrive at, obviously, their carbon-free % measurement. For the most of our customers who are using this today, they don't have a very high CFE score, I would say that, but this is the starting point for them, and it helps them create the discussion around what they need to do next. The next steps for these customers look like being whether it's physical energy trading. So we have peer-to-peer models working in the APAC region already today so that they can optimise their CFE scores. We also are looking at then the next steps with our partners Emirates, which is a US, one of the largest registries in the US market, to develop a granular REC certificate marketplace. Again, it allows customers to have that an aggregated level of both supply and demand, but enable a broader market participation so that customers can move towards a 24/7 CFE score incrementally. Sorry, I went over. I thought I was going really, really quick there.
16 seconds.
Sorry.
So you see, we're not just hourly matching certificates, we're also minute matching the presentations. So perfect timing. Thank you, Fiona. We're going to call all the panelists up now for a short discussion. Please prepare some questions if you have them. Whilst we do so, we do have a poll on data. So I don't know if Simon, if you could bring up that final poll, it's the last one. Please come up, join us. Yeah, and if the audience would like to answer that poll, which is going to what Constance said about the need for increased transparency on data, and was also touched upon clearly in Fiona's presentation. If you want more details about those case studies that Fiona presented on Power Ledger, they're actually on our website, those case studies, on the Euroelectric 24/7 Task Force website. Okay. And Simon, feel free to show that. Yeah, great, thanks. I'll just go down the line and maybe starting with you, Fiona, as you kicked off the data discussion. From your perspective, what is that key barrier, or what would facilitate data exchange? Is it policy, business models, or technology in your view?
I think what we're seeing is there's a lot more access to data than we previously expected there to be. I think it's the standardisation of data and I guess the consolidation of that data across markets too. So particularly in the EU sense, having those data hubs and developing the data hubs is going to be essential to building on a solution for 24/7.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe following on, Constance, you raised the question actually. I mean, from the city's point of view, do you see one of those as the winner for what would facilitate it?
I think policy and technology, definitely. I mean, someone said earlier today, we only use 30% of the data that's available overall across the energy systems, right? So we need to create some of those tools that you described to make it very digestible and very easy for demand-side consumers, whether they are businesses or cities. Not all businesses will have the technical capacity to engage, in more sophisticated contractual problems. It's the same for cities. We work with large cities, but as soon as you go in kind of the next tier, we need to make things as easy as possible for them. So a mix of policy and technology, I think, is what's required.
Okay.
So maybe a question from my side for Fiona. Do we have the digital tools to scale up 24/7 carbon-free energy matching?
I'm fairly bullish. I think we do. I think we've got some, in terms of trading algorithms and demand algorithms, we've spent 6 years building out tools to allow for that, to allow for the optimised scaling up of renewables across the grid too.
Great.
Okay. Any questions from the audience yet? I see one here. There's quite a few. Wow, this is going to be a game of... Maybe we take a couple of questions. Please keep it short. Introduce yourself, but keep it real short. And no comments, please.
Stephen Woodhouse from AFRY. Are we actually seeing any demand response in response to these signals? Are you actually changing your patterns of consumption to match the production times, or is it just about accounting?
I assume that's a question to Caroline.
Oh, I don't have to use the mic.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, and the next question was over there, but please answer, Caroline, yeah.
So, from a framework for 24/7, absolutely demand response is part of that. And I think depending on what piece of our portfolio you're looking at, that changes, right? So we are pursuing demand response. We actually have piloted AI that is helping us to shift load so that where we have the correct signals, we can actually shift load between our fungible load or our data centers where we have the capacity to do that. We are very mission critical, business critical, load center, right? So our capacity may not be as much as other areas in the industry, but we're piloting this technology because we need it to scale across the economy to other industrial players and other commercial players as well who can do this. So the answer is yes, but more importantly, we're developing the tools that will make sure that other, companies on the grid can do it and maybe even do it in more instances where they aren't as, mission critical.
Thanks, Caroline. And feel free to jump in, but we're going to take the next question, yeah? And if it's...
Speak into the cube, yeah?
That's it.
Hi, Paul Manning from Novogrid. You talk a lot about matching supply and demand, but what about the impact of transmission and distribution, it being your electric, things like balancing, losses, curtailment, all those things that system operators have to do to maintain the grid?
Sebastian, do you have an answer to that? Anybody willing to take?
Yes, sorry. So I would say for the matching, whenever a corporate buyer is getting an as-produced profile out of the asset, is quickly confronted to balancing risk, all the management of the reality of getting green electricity. So I think on this side, moving from virtual PPA or green baseload to really as-produced PPA is a good trend, because then it will allow for more focus on these kind of issues. And typically, if you want to add batteries to increase 24/7 matching, it will also help the grid to stabilize the system. Now your question is way wider than my answer, but that's what I can bring to the table.
Well, I'll just add the answer is irrespective of if we're looking in the 24/7 framework, we have to invest in the grid as it is right now. I think that this is one part that sorely gets underlooked. We focus on the cool generation pieces, but we don't focus on the wires as much. One thing that I think forces us through the 24/7 framework is to focus on the grid, and we will run into the question of, is this going to improve or decrease reliability? How much more transmission are we going to have to build? And when you are focused on the grid that you're operated on, you have to answer those questions because they're going to affect the cost effectiveness of your projects. When you can source from anywhere and walk away, you don't have to do that, right? So I think that this framework forces you to get invested in the poles and wires, which largely I think we haven't been and need to by 10x.
Yeah, yeah, fully agree with that. Obviously, as Eurelectric, we agree with that, and it's a great question. And in fact, when you look at like locational marginal emissions as well, and grid constraints, that is a huge issue for us. So yeah, great question. We're going to move on to the next one.
Hello. Yeah, Peter Abbasi from Nord Pool again. I have a question concerning the regulatory framework, because we are also launching a marketplace for hourly granular certificates. And do you think, from your perspective, from what you have seen, that we have the right regulatory framework for a 24/7 matching in place, in Europe at least?
No.
No.
Okay. So, what do you think we should aim for? What are the next 2-3 things that needs to be achieved?
Maybe I start from Eurelectric, because that's our bread and butter, the policy side of it. Without going into the details of the Renewables Directive, Article 19, 20, 20A, and all that, we need granular certificates. We need the ability to have those time-stamped certificates. And as I said, we're working closely with Energy Tag. There's a couple of representatives in the room today on that, yeah, and we're seeing progress with it. We're seeing some support from both the Commission and the Parliament on it. It's not resolved, it's not finalised, but that's what we need. We need the ability. We don't want compulsory hourly certificates or granular certificates, but we need the option to do that, and currently, that's not possible. So we need that to be allowed across Europe, yeah. So that's a short answer. Anybody else want to dive in?
I would also add some standards and help on how to define 24/7 CFE. So how do we deal with storage? How do we deal with imports, grid issues as well? I think that would also be very helpful.
Yeah.
And maybe one last thing on the kind of carbon accounting rules at the corporate side or the city side. They fail at the moment to kind of recognize the difference between a kilowatt hour at the moment where there's a lot of sun already on the grid, and one when we need to use gas peaker plants to balance the grid. So finding a way to solve that, it's a complicated topic, but it needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
Not directly regulatory, but still important.
Very good. And back to the standards topic. There are guidelines and standards on the Energy Tag website. We've also got links on our website for that, so some key information there. We're going to take, I think, one last question, as we're over time. There's one at the back there. Thanks, Diana.
So I'll try to.
Thank you. Gerhard Gampel, Verbund Austria. I have a question to Fiona. PowerLedger is one of the most prominent blockchain technologies globally acting. And as we are some years behind the big hype of blockchain technology, my question to you is, why does PowerLedger still stick to blockchain technology from a perspective from technology, from costs, and also from the perspective of the customers? Where do you see the advantages that you still stick to blockchain technologies? Thank you.
So I guess I'd start this by saying that we are, I guess we picked the right technology for the right application. So where we think that blockchain comes to the fore is in creating that digital time-stamped, location-stamped record, and that's why we have stuck with blockchain. From a scaling up perspective, we've chosen to fork from the Solana blockchain, which means that we've picked the chain that actually is capable of scaling to around 50,000 transactions per second. It's an energy-efficient chain also. So we think in this market and moving towards that granular model, that will become increasingly important.
Okay, we had one last question. You know, I'm keen to make sure we get all the questions done. So there's one in the middle there. Yeah, I think it was Simone.
Hi, thanks. It's Simone from FlexiDAO. Maybe mainly for Sebastien, but also for the rest of the group. There has been a lot of focus on PPAs in this talk, and Job opened saying that PPAs, long-term PPAs especially, are for very elite clubs of Fortune 500 companies. So does it mean that they are the only ones that can do 24/7, or are you also working on different type of contracts that can be more inclusive and not scare off maybe other buyers?
That's a very good question, Simone. I would say that today, 24/7 is still quite new, so we are more exploring with the front runners and the mature client to push the boundaries. But definitely the scale-up and the democratization of the approach to a larger customer base is key. But I don't see it coming this year or the next one. But that's definitely something we're thinking about, but we don't have yet any concrete plans. There's already quite a bit of things to do with the current consumers.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to have to end there. It's unfortunate because time is ticking, but we are going to have some concluding remarks from Caroline. What I will say before she concludes is that, and following on from that question, I mean, this is a journey. You know, this is not from one day to the next, you go from 0 to hero, to 100%. You know, this is going to take years. Even Google have, you know, put their target as 2030, and I think they'll admit that's also quite ambitious. So, you know, we're there working with various other partners to facilitate it, to make it as easy as possible, not just for those front runners, but for all players. And ultimately, you know, if the ultimate aim is full grid decarbonization, then we won't need 24/7. Everyone will be on, you know, carbon-free energy. So that's the end game. We at Eurelectric believe we can do it well before mid-century in Europe, and we're pushing to accelerate that as much as possible. Thank you so much. But the closing remarks to Caroline.
Sure,
Please.
and there's
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, 24/7 is about impact, right? So as buyers, how can we use our role in the economy, our private capital, our role in this conversation to drive the absolute most amount of impact on the grid and beyond? I mean, a lot of the technologies that we're looking at, whether it's how to help demand-side management or CCS, are things that are going to scale beyond just our own operations, right? So our vision is for this grid, for everyone to run on carbon-free energy. And we talked about earlier, that means we're going to need to change the ecosystem. So one of the things multiple of the people up here are a part of with us is the 24/7 Carbon-Free Energy Compact. And this is something that we were, you know, lucky enough to partner with with the UN over a year ago, and some of our colleagues in the space, Microsoft, who's here today, is also a part of the compact with us, as well as all the number of players that are up here. And we started this compact mainly because of that first question of how are we going to do this? Like, this is the system change, right? But also the question of recognizing why are we doing this and who are we doing this for? We have this saying at Google, which is that if we achieve a 24/7 carbon-free future and no one else does, we've failed, right? So we are putting our efforts behind creating scalable solutions, but that scalable solution is for everyone. We want everyone to reach this. And so we don't know how to do all of this. We know how to do a good bit of it. We don't know how to do all of it. We don't have all the technologies we need today for the clean future tomorrow. We don't have all the data. We don't have all the softwares. We don't have all the contract structures and the financing. I'm also bullish, though. I think we are going to get there. We're not going to get there if we work together. So, you know, our partners at Euroelectric, we talked about it in the beginning, a little bit that we're this academy idea and how we're going to move forward. But one of the ways I would encourage people to get involved is to get involved in the compact. And I mean, this is like a bit of a war room, right? We are rolling up our sleeves and talking to each other and figuring out how we're going to do this. And we're going to need those conversations in order to answer the 40 other questions that I'm sure are in your mind right now moving forward. So go carbonfree247.com, get involved, and continue to push us and everyone else to do this better.
That's great. Thank you, Caroline. Go carbon-free 24/7. That's the summary. Thank you so much for staying to the end. Thank you for the panelists for being here. Really insightful and a really global view of what's happening. That's it for today. For those who are joining us for the gala dinner, the buses will leave at 6:30 from the entrance. We'll take a taxi. And see you tomorrow. Thank you so much.